Hi, I'm going to give you some background into the video you're about to watch. Mary Price, without a doubt, had the best memory of anyone I've ever known in my life. If she didn't have total recall, it was close. She was constantly reminding us all, I and my brothers, of stories about our first grade teachers that we didn't even remember. We were with them all day, but she'd know that, and things about our neighborhood and history, and it's just unbelievable. And this knowledge extended to the history of her family and Frank Price's family. I think she remembered more about his family than he did, maybe. And so I and my brothers and my cousins from time to time would talk about the need to record this before she died so we wouldn't lose it. And so I decided to try and take the bull by the horns, and I think I started around 2005 asking her, politely, if she would, let me videotape her talk about the family, and she would politely refuse. And then the next year I did it, and the next year, and I started getting a little bit more insistent, and she started getting a little more annoyed. And I think that she felt like doing it was like admitting that she was going to be checking out soon or something like that. She didn't want to do it, kind of like a celebrity who has terminal cancer and they have a tribute show for them, because they know they're going to be dying soon. She didn't want to do it, and I kept bugging her year after year, and finally I remember I got real insistent. I think it was 2015, and she sat down. And the funny thing is, if you'll notice, for some time in the beginning of this recording, she just looks pissed off, and and I can certainly be annoying. I'll cop to that, but I was being as polite as possible, and she was still really annoyed with me. And then finally she started warming up a little bit, and I was tempted to give her a hard time back, but I didn't want her to quit, so I just kept being polite. And so we talk a lot about her, the history. I got an old book about the history of her family. I hope we kept it. I hope someone has that. It's really, really interesting, really good. And we talk all the way up until, I think, the early 1900s, like after World War I, and we stopped. And unfortunately, we didn't finish. I didn't get her back. I had a hard time after this getting her to return to the table, and this is the only recording we have. And I would have really liked to have gotten some more stuff about, obviously her and Frank Price's marriage, more about her parents, some of the stories about her dad giving directions to Bonnie and Clyde. Can't remember if it was Uncle Bud or Uncle Jim playing baseball against Willie Nelson's team in Texas. And Papa, my grandfather, her dad, getting asked to say a prayer in church and walking out because he didn't want to do it. I love that story. And just all the Milford stories, which, are going to kind of fade, I'm afraid, now. But this is better than nothing. And at the end, there's also a little bit of us walking around her house, talking about the house. So that's nice. So anyway, this is what I got. I put it together. It's not real fancy, not a lot of real fancy transitions or soundtrack, but I think it's kind of fun. So I hope you enjoy it. Good evening. Here we are with Mary Price and her son David Price and her granddaughter Hannah Mary Price, and who gets to be here a little bit before she goes to bed. And we're going to talk about something I was going to call Memories of Mary Price, and we could call it that, but we're just going to mostly talk about the history of the Price Bell family, going back about as far as we can remember. And as fodder for that, we have this book called, can't quite get it in there. It's called Who Am I? And there's the book. And this book was it was put together, it's a genealogy book that was put together by her grandmother. And there were 3 copies given to each of her 3 children. And this copy was given to my mother's great aunt, my mother's aunt, Mary McLaughlin?
Price.
Mary Price.
Mary McLaughlin Price.
Mary McLaughlin Price, and I have a hard time with all the names. But so here's the book. We'll just start this by handing this book over. And as we open this book up, I think it was written in 1926. It's kind of neat because we'll get to your grandfather later. But I went through this book, and the neat things about this book are it goes back 5 generations in America, but it also as it states here, Mother dear, if you would not mind reading this is a lot of the genealogy, who am I, the purpose of this book is, please read that down there as I read it earlier.
Life is a short span at the longest. The most tenacious memory is treacherous at best. Every family loses much of its heritage by the failure of those who remember simple but interesting items of the family story to record them.
Very nice. And this book, it's got a little stamp there, and it was handwritten. And let's go to the quick table of contents, I think, explaining the book. This explains the book right here, but what the book is, it's got details of 5 generations. It goes back to the Revolution, it goes back to the Civil War, and it goes back to the history of the family in Europe. Please don't whistle, Hannah. Thank you. And this book goes back to history going back to the 1200s, actually, the 13th century in Europe. You have little doodads, like this is a picture of her Robert Pyre, an old descendant in 1500, lived there in Scotland. Talks about colonial times and who fought in the Revolution here. Different lineage there. And there is a bunch of wills. She actually hand wrote the wills of different people. I'm not going into that, but there's more details on the Revolution, the war there. And I know there's something here on the Civil War. Where is that? The Scotch and Cumberland. And I think we have... So, if we talk about the family member that came to America, we don't want to go all the way back to 1200, but let's start with the U.S. Could we talk? Who's the first relative to come over and establish roots in the States, Mama? Duncan McLaughlin.
Duncan McLaughlin.
Born in Scotland in 1776, died in 1850. Came with his father Dougal to USA in 1794. Okay, and how far do your memories go back to with your family and what you know, going back to the Civil War and the 2 sides of your, I guess I would call it 2 sides, or all the ancestors of your family going back to that time?
I'm sorry, what? You're asking me.
So how far can you go back to talk about your family? He came in 1776, and then I'm going to cut this, so it doesn't matter. I mean, we don't have to. Okay. Where should we start with all of this?
Well, I really don't know things I'm sure about David, except my grandparents and parents.
Right.
You know. That's,
okay. So
I know names of other people, but
right. And we, how about that bed? If we want to talk about something that goes back to the beginning, and it's good for us, we can just talk like this, because then I still use all this and cut some of it out and go.
Sure.
If we go back to that bed, Hannah, give me that iPhone, because I have pictures on there that I want to look at. I'm really sorry. Isn't that one of the oldest? That goes back to
That goes
1850.
back to the Civil War.
There you go.
And that's the McFadden family, though, rather than the McLaughlin.
Right.
It's my grandmother's.
So let's just talk about. Hold on a second. So, when we talk about your family and the different names that go back, there's names like McFadden, and was it Woods? What are some of the names of? Because as we go back, obviously it splits more and more as you go into your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents, and there's a lot more. I guess lineage that gets in there, but I know most of your family came from Scotland and then Ireland as well. Is that right?
Correct, but I don't know any stories about the ones coming from Ireland. The Scottish stuff is recorded by my grandmother, who was married to a pure blood Scotsman,
Right.
and that's why so much is about Scotland.
And later on in this book, towards the back of it, it actually goes into the history of the Scottish settlers in South Carolina, which is where.
North Carolina.
Oops, North Carolina. Is it North Carolina?
North Carolina is where they came and settled.
Okay, well there you
The
go.
McLaughlins.
That's why I'm glad I have you here. So North Carolina, they settled in North Carolina, and then I think immigrated later to Texas. In terms of memories, a couple of memories go back to the Civil War, supported by artifacts. This is a picture I just took of. Can't see it real well, but that's a bed up in the guest room, and that goes back to the Civil War. Can you tell us a little bit about that bed?
This concerns the McFadden family.
Okay.
My great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, John Colt McFadden, fought in the Civil War. He was engaged to marry my great-grandmother, whose name was...
Let's see if we can find that in there somewhere.
It's in here.
I know, it's a lot.
Whose name was Louisa Margaret Waters.
Okay.
They were engaged, and she happened to be an excellent seamstress.
Okay.
And during the Civil War, when Charleston was blockaded, and the ladies of South Carolina who could afford it had been going to Charleston and buying their hats, she devised a method to dye corn shucks and make pretty hats to simulate feathers and fancier things that they'd had before the war.
Right.
She saved the money she made from making these hats, and she purchased a beautiful cherry wood bed that was their bed after they married, and she willed it to her granddaughter, Mary McLaughlin Price,
Okay.
who later willed it to her niece, named for her, Mary Bell Price.
Okay.
And it's in our guest room in this house
Hannah,
right now.
you quit playing your little Candy Crush and pull up that picture again so I can show it to Grandmama? That's what you're here for. Pull the picture up. Last picture of the bed I took.
Oh, but you took it with just the mattress?
No, I covered it up with the bedspread.
good.
Don't have to worry. Don't freak out. There it is again. The color doesn't come across so well, but you still get the idea. There's that picture. And here again, this is the book that talks about the Scotch in Cumberland County, North Carolina, and how
Scots.
the Scots. It actually says Scotch. That's what's written there, believe it or not. Maybe she's talking about booze. And earlier in the book, Mama was just talking about McFadden, and that is in the Civil War. And I am not. That's actually going to be. If you look at that, that is Now, it's somewhere in here, but it talks about where here it is, it's coming up right here. It's kind of was neat to find this. If we can get to it. Here it is, the Civil War. One thing that I thought was really, really neat, John C. McFadden. It talks in here how he was offered a position. He was to be taken out of the fighting and to be on a board that, you know, was in charge of court martials. And he asked, if you can see General Longstreet. He personally begged General Longstreet to let him go back to fighting. And General Longstreet did. It talks here about his career and what he did. And this was written by his daughter? Daughter. So
Frances.
she might have been a little bit flattering towards him, but anyway, that's
Frances McFadden.
Frances McFadden, my mother's grandmother. So it's kind of neat to read that. So this is your great grandmother that did this, right?
No,
Go on.
Margaret Louisa Waters McFadden was my great grandmother.
Right.
Her daughter Frances McFadden was my grandmother,
Okay.
and she wrote the book. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You had another interesting Civil War story about your father's side of the family. Real quick one. What was that? Something to do with Stonewall Jackson?
Oh, my other grandmother, Martha Emma Clifford Little, who married my grandfather, James Lewis Bell. Her father fought in the Civil War too. His name was Albert Little, and at one time he was wounded and he was lying by the side of a road, perishing almost for want of a drink of water, and General Stonewall Jackson saw him, got down off his horse, and gave him a drink from his personal flask of water.
Water, not whiskey.
No,
Okay.
water.
All right, very good. Well, that's pretty interesting. Pretty neat story. Okay. And so anything else leading? I know most of your detailed memory begins with obviously your side of the family, although I think you do have some pretty interesting stories about Frank Price's side of the family. But we'll start with your side of the family. What I'd like to do here is talk about your family and then maybe up to when you met Pop, and then talk a little bit about his family, and of course eventually talk mostly about me. But anyway, so what we'll do is let's talk about Civil War, and then after that, do you have any other memories or stories?
No, I didn't live then.
You didn't live then? You didn't? Okay. Well, that's interesting news for everyone.
John thought I did.
Right. Who did?
John, he asked me when he was in second grade what it was like to live during the Civil War.
Ouch. Ouch. I was actually born the same year that the last veteran died, for whatever that's worth, 1959. So I guess we can fast forward a little bit to your grandparents, or maybe we could talk about how your family came to settle in Milford.
First,
Well, wouldn't we?
I thought you wanted to know how my parents met or something.
Well, I do, but wouldn't we talk about Milford first? Wouldn't that come first? I mean, wouldn't that kind of be how your
Whatever.
well, they met in North Carolina, though. Is that right?
No, my parents met in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
Their grandfathers, who had known each other in Virginia, when my grandfather McLaughlin had finished Davidson College and had gone into the Presbyterian Seminary, which met at that time on the campus of the school where my grandfather, Bell, was an underclassman. So they knew each other then.
Okay.
And years later, my grandfather McLaughlin accepted the only church call to a church west of the Mississippi that he ever accepted. Otherwise, all his pastorates were east of the Mississippi, in more or less the deep south.
And we're talking about Grandfather Bell or Grandfather McLaughlin?
Talking about both of them. Dougal Neal McLaughlin was a Southern.
Your mother's father.
Right. And my father's father, James Lewis Bell, all of his pastorates were in Texas.
But they both started in North Carolina? Because this is what, both of these sides of the family.
Virginia is where they knew each other. First in school.
In school in Virginia, okay.
Yes.
But your mother's side of the family was in North Carolina. And how about Papa or Tom Bell, his father,
They were Texans. Originally, most people who came to Texas came from North Carolina. But I don't know those.
But they'd been in Texas a long time.
Who?
Papa's family.
The Bells, yes.
The Bells. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the Scottish people came, and a lot of them settled in North Carolina, and at one point, the Bells immigrated to Texas. They immigrated.
Well, I have known nothing about
You don't know
that.
when that was. Okay. All right. Just trying to get this is all still kind of new to me. All right. So so they met the two both your grandparents were in the clergy, and they both they met in school in Virginia.
In school in Virginia, my grandfather Bell was an underclassman at Hampton Sydney College in Virginia. My grandfather McLaughlin had graduated from Davidson College in North Carolina and was in seminary and on the campus of the school where my grandfather Bell was the underclassman. So they knew each other. That seminary later moved to Richmond, where it is today. And years later, my grandfather McLaughlin accepted a call from the Second Presbyterian Church in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
And when he got there, he found his old acquaintance, James Lewis Bell, who was teaching at the Presbyterian Seminary in Austin.
Okay.
And the Bell family joined the church where my grandfather McLaughlin was the minister.
Okay.
My mother and father were about 15 years old when they met. Thank you. They met and went to the same high school together and the same church and were boy and girlfriend till a few years later when my grandfather McLaughlin moved on to Norfolk, Virginia, where he spent the rest of his ministry. My grandfather Bell stayed in Austin a while longer and then went from there to Milford, Texas for his first ministry there.
How old do you think he was when that happened about?
In his maybe 40, in his early 40s,
Okay.
I would say.
I'd heard that about Austin before, but I didn't remember that detail. Know if I'd ever heard that detail, didn't remember that detail. Neat. So your parents met, and about how old were they when they got married?
Well, they they didn't see each other for years, and though my dad had asked if he could visit my mother in Virginia, and had received permission to, he'd never been able to get enough money together to do that.
So they knew each other as
High school
kids
kids.
and high school kids.
And then they didn't see each other for years.
For several years. Did they date a little bit, or go out, or see each other then, or did they just friends, or?
No, they were boy and girlfriend
Okay.
in high school.
Okay.
But they didn't see each other for a number of years. And my mother graduated from high school. My dad did too, but when my mother graduated, she went to Hollins College in Roanoke, Virginia, which was where all her mother and her aunts had gone. It was a family tradition. And she met a girl who told her that she was from Milford, Texas.
Okay.
And there was a Presbyterian minister there who had a family of good-looking boys. And it turned out that my dad was the family she was talking about.
Right.
And so they renewed their friendship, and
And this was your father's father.
Right. James L. Bell.
And he's a pretty good looking guy. And you speak very highly of him.
Very, very highly.
Okay, we'll get back on him later, but
But
for
was
Papa's, then how many, it was all boys, wasn't Papa's?
one of 4 boys, the
Wow.
oldest of 4. And
Just like our family.
later, his next brother, Louis, the one just under him, was killed at the end of World War One. But there were 4 boys in the family originally.
Okay. And Papa is the oldest, and Louis was the next, and Louis died at the end. Was he the one that, I get him mixed up, but did he die in the trolley car accident?
Right. They were at the naval station training to go in the Navy when the war ended. And he stayed to visit a friend who had a car, and they were riding down the street in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And the trolley jumped the track and killed him and permanently injured his friend.
And Papa or Tom Bell, as we call Papa, was and Louis were both enlisted in the war at the same time. They thought the war was going to be over real quickly, so they didn't enlist sooner. By the time they enlisted, the war was over. And sad to say, Louis was killed, even though he never really went into the war. Killed on the way back from training. And what were Papa's other 2 brothers' name?
James Clifford Bell was the 3rd one, and George Herbert Bell was the 4th.
And tell us a little bit about them. James Clifford.
Well, he had 3 wives,
Ouch.
and George Herbert had 2 wives.
And I remember hearing about George Herbert. He lived the longest
In
of it,
Mahia.
Papa.
He lived in Mahia, and he
Texas?
Mahia, Texas, yes. And my Uncle James lived in Dallas, Texas. And Herbert was so good to us kids. He and my dad were close, the 1st and the 4th of the family of 4 boys. And he had our only 2 first cousins, Sally and George Jr. were our first cousins. And he would invite us to come to Mahia every summer and spend a week at our house and get to know our cousins. And it was big in our lives because we didn't get to go many places during those hard days of the Depression.
And when did Herbert die? Later, didn't
He died
50s
right
or 60s?
before my grandmother did. My grandmother died in 1963, right before Rob was born.
Mm-hmm.
And Herbert had died about 2 years before that.
No, 61. Okay, I don't remember him. I was born, but I don't remember him.
And James died in 1954.
Okay. All right. So then your father wanted to get back in touch with your mother. He went and visit her? Did he go visit her?
Yes, he went and visited her, and then they renewed their romance, and at some point he proposed, and they planned to marry right after the World War I ended, which they did in Norfolk.
And they didn't, you mentioned they had a...
And went to live in Dallas.
Right. And that there... Get this back on here. Oops. And there it is. Their wedding invitation, which you said was at home
In Norfolk.
in Norfolk because it was right after his brother Lewis's death, and it wasn't proper to have a big wedding in that time. Really, in a sense, it's not real comfortable to do it now as well, right after there's a death in the family like
does
that.
mourn after a
Right.
treasured memory dies.
Okay, so they got married, and can you tell us about your, before we go into your family, can you tell us about your mother's family and how many children there were in your mother's immediate?
3. My mother was the oldest. She was named for her grandmother McFadden. My Aunt Mary
Okay,
was a few years younger,
all right.
and my Uncle John was the baby of the family. He was 13 years younger than my mother.
Wow. And what
He was born when they lived in Macon, Georgia.
Okay.
She and Aunt Mary were born in Chester, South Carolina.
Can you tell? I don't know, remember much of, or if anything, of Uncle John. Can you tell us about him?
Well, he was just so much younger, and
That's Aunt Mary. Can't get that in the camera, but that's Aunt Mary. And she was, I don't know, that's probably around 1960. Anyway, Uncle John.
my mother wasn't at home long, with him because she was 13 when he was born, and he ended up though owning an advertising agency in Norfolk. And for many years he was a bachelor, and after my grandfather McLaughlin died, he shared a home with my grandmother McLaughlin and more or less took care of her. And then rather late in life he met a beautiful young career woman, and they were married, and they continued to live in Norfolk for a while, and then moved to Washington, D.C., and lived there a number of years. His drinking problem got too much, though. They divorced, and he went to live in South Carolina.
Okay.
He lived in Charleston, where he lived until he died.
About when was that?
Gosh. Let me see. Tom was... That summer we went to South Carolina. We saw
I
him.
remember that.
We saw him.
That was 65 or something like that?
Yeah, because Rob was almost 2.
Right.
He died between 65 and 70.
And the third sibling, or the second, but interestingly enough, was Aunt Mary, who married another Price.
A career Navy.
Career Navy named Russell Price, same last name as Frank Price, or my dad. But you have a lot of stories about Aunt Mary and her adopted son Russell and her husband Russell. They had an interesting. They had interesting lives.
Yeah, they lived in China, the Philippines, the Canal Zone, Hawaii, because he was career peacetime Navy, and he was, when the Philippines were threatened, all the dependents were called home to live in the United States, and he never had foreign duty after that, and he died during World War II of a heart attack. But he was in active duty at the Charleston Navy Yard at the time.
Okay.
He was from Baltimore originally.
And your cousin Russell has a lot of memories, or some memories of the overseas. And I remember he had told me that his first memory, he had yellow fever or something.
No,
he almost died.
His mother died of some kind of fever down in the Canal Zone, and Russell was just 1 year old, and so his father, after a year or two, met my Aunt Mary in Norfolk at church, and courted her, and they were married. And we kids did not realize that Russell was not our blood cousin for many, many years. We didn't. He was our cousin, and that was it. And it was only when we got older that we learned that he really was a step member of the family. But he was a good guy, and they visited us often, and we thought a lot of him.
Okay. All right.
That was beautiful what you wrote about Tony.
Thank you very much. Mary Price in her house. This is August 20th, 2015. This is the neighborhood we moved. Do you remember the exact date, Mama, when we moved here?
Of course, the first week in March of 1973.
1973.
You were 14.
What's that, 42 years now? 83, 93, 03. Beautiful. It's a beautiful August day. And this neighborhood, everyone's moved on. We don't have any original neighbors except for the people right next door, the Shorts. And unfortunately, Mr. Short recently passed on, but Mrs. is still there in that house right there. Went to high school with her kids. It's the side yard, and this is just get a quick view of the house and the big rock. This is the only double driveway in our whole neighborhood. We're proud of that. I'm not sure how that happened. What are these flowers here, Mama, around the big rock?
Plant them every year. They're begonias.
Uh-huh. The red ones are begonias?
The red ones are begonias. The white ones are geraniums. And
Okay.
the little blue ones are ageratum. And I did them in these colors this year because Colleen, our friend across the street, was getting married on the 4th of July.
Beautiful. And you plant those every year
I plant those every year.
in May, right?
And because the flowers have gotten so expensive now, I put in a few other things, hostas and a couple of peony bushes to fill up some of the space.
Fill up the space, right? These trees, when we moved here, were either not here or they were just little saplings,
The only one.
right? This is the only one that was here?
That's the only tree that was here.
And is that an oak?
No. They're ash trees.
Ash tree. The other one's an ash tree too?
The only one that isn't an ash tree is that crabapple.
That's a crabapple tree. Okay. And so let's nice rose bushes there. I've stuck myself on many times. Planted those when Uncle Bud died?
And the next year we planted the ones on the other end in honor of your and Kazumi's wedding.
Oh, nice. So y'all, those were planted. I didn't even know that. And what are these bushes here? What are they called?
Yews, Y-E-W.
Y-E-W. And how about there? Are those dogwood? Or, no, that's not dogwood. That's dogwood's a.
No, they're yews.
What about that? These here. These.
Hostas.
Okay. I don't know. I don't remember. And I'm sure she's not happy that we're walking through the garage here, but
I'm not.
made some wonderful steaks on that grill just yesterday. Here's the back porch. I love just hanging out here. It's great. I think everybody does. And I don't know if we don't have time to go through all the plants, but Mama,
I plant shade plants out here.
tell us which ones of these are shade plants, obviously. Which ones of these come back or perennials and which are annuals? I think all these little things here are annuals. You have to plant them every year, right?
All annuals. There are a few perennials in the middle here.
Okay.
A few over there.
And what are these right here?
What? Begonias.
Oh, these are
White
begonias too. White begonias.
They're
Okay.
shade plants.
I'm gonna have to remember that. And what is this? Is this oh, this looks like cilantro or something there. Is that right?
No.
No?
No, it's an early spring flower, a perennial.
Look at those pretty things. Do you have hummingbirds ever come here anymore?
Oh, they do. They love these flowers.
Oh, and you see them right in
I saw
front of
them more when we had the fence out here around the bed.
hummingbird flowers. Beautiful. And I and my wife gave Mary Price and Frank Price's rain, whatever it's called, Cascade, come from Japan. I don't know. Can't remember how we got it here. It's heavy as heck, but
You mailed it, and you gave it to Dad for his birthday, his
Right.
first year.
right.
And Dick Anthony came out and installed it for us
Oh, is that right?
because we saw one on their house, and
Hmm.
Dad loved it.
I remember buying it in Machida when we lived there.
He wanted to put it right here, and you said that was where you'd intended it to go.
Excellent. This tree, which needs to be trimmed pretty soon,
And it will be.
is this isn't the one. I think is that birch tree the one I got from Frank's that was dying?
No, the other crabapple tree.
Oh, that crabapple tree over there.
No, we planted the birch.
That tree right there. I got it when I worked at a nursery and it was dying and it was a dumpster. The guy I remember giving me a hard time for being a Welch, which didn't really fit. I think he meant a scavenger, but anyway, I took the tree and now look at it, and there's a pretty birch tree. And these things are so big, they need to be trimmed. They're going into the neighbor's yard. And,
Contracted for them to be trimmed.
Right.
A month.
and is this another ash crabapple? Yeah, sorry about that. And just want to go around here. Beautiful yard. This stump over here was an apple tree. We got millions of apples off that thing over the years. And they just had to chop it down last year, 2014, I think. And this is the garden. Let's talk about the garden. Good neighbors over there. A couple kids play with Hana a lot. This is the garden.
This is the annual inn with the tomato plants.
Tomatoes, a lot of tomatoes. We had a lot of tomatoes this trip. They were great.
And the low flowers and the zinnias in the baskets.
Okay.
Those will all go when fall comes. And the things in the background are the perennials down there. They come out every spring.
Right.
Grow and furnish flowers from midsummer on.
Beautiful.
They all need trimming now because I've been visiting with you rather than taking care of the garden.
I'm doing a little video of the yard and the garden, so I can. Otherwise, I'll be clueless if I ever have to take it over.
He thinks I'm going to give it to him.
Yeah. And so, do we have some herbs in here somewhere? I think that you picked.
Basil back there by the fence.
Basil's right by the fence over there.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
I might get some marigolds here. The squirrels haven't fooled with it since I put the spray on.
Yep, I recognize those leaves as marigolds
Yeah.
now that you mention it.
They've eaten all the buds off of them.
And what are these things right here? I'm putting my foot on right there.
John, last year when all of you were here,
Yeah.
Heather brought me those for a gift. They shine at night.
Nice. Okay. Hanging baskets.
And the white.
Nice gift from Jane
David,
Hanson. Yes.
you need to say that the white phlox bear your name, David, and they bloom.
Those
first.
right there?
The
Isn't
white
that
ones,
something?
that one and that one.
There you go.
I need to trim the bushes down, but they're my healthiest phlox.
All right. Just beautiful.
And then down here is the rhubarb.
Rhubarb.
So many good cakes and
What did she say?
I make.
What did you say?
Make sure you video the thing you fixed.
Video the what?
Video that you fixed that.
Yes. Yeah, I just did. I fixed that. It wasn't working. My one little handyman thing. It's now working beautifully. That came from Cousin Jane. Thank you very much. Thanks for your contribution.
I've loved it today. It's been going all day long.
Rhubarb.
That's what Jane was trying to describe to me, how each side went in an opposite direction. So pretty.
Yeah. And what is this right here, this plant?
These are big peony bushes.
Big peony.
Pale pink flowers in early spring.
And those are the, what is that, just weeds there?
No, that's a grass.
Okay. It's kind of cool looking. Thought it was a neat looking weed.
I planted that there because Les and John put the fence up
Yeah.
and planted some of the others.
What are these on the end, Mama?
Lilies.
Lilies?
Lilies.
And what kind of bush is that?
Oh, well, it needs trimming.
It does need trimming, and I'm a bad son because I could have looked at that and done that while I was here. And I didn't.
Right. I'll get it done.
I was here a long time.
These have been here for.
Maybe I can do it real quick. Because I mean, I'll go, and if I have a few minutes, I can try and do that. No?
Don't try
I'll
to
just
do
hack it up.
anything. You're frustrated.
And what is that right there? That on the end there, that
What?
bush?
Oh, those are hydrangea bushes.
Okay.
Which do only minimally well because they don't get any sun anymore.
All right. These daisies here?
Those are Shasta daisies.
Okay. Shasta daisies.
Shasta daisies.
There we go. We got a pool over here. Neighbors, let us go over there. The Milky's, really nice people. Well, that's about it. This layout's somewhat what it has always been, although they've expanded this bed and put in this garden over here.
This is the second year we were here.
I liked it all because it's not too much to mow. And I guess hummingbirds go to this little thing right here under the tree, right?
Oh, yes. My neighbor gave me that. And another one that I don't have out yet with birds flying on it.
Very good. All right. That's all for now. Thank you very much. Many beautiful, wonderful times been spent on this porch, cooking. As I said, I made a great meal the other day, if I do say so myself. And then this is the screened-in porch, or whatever you want to call it. And I love working out there, sitting out there.
We added that in 1987.
Added 1987. This house, when was this house built? Late 60s?
The house was built in 1970.
1970. Yeah. There we go.